The stagecoach left Clara Vance where the road gave up. Its wheels cut two wet scars through the gray flats of Blackwood Valley, then rolled on west with a crack of leather and a cough of tired horses. The sound thinned quick. After a minute, all that remained was wind dragging ash across the ground, like flour spilled from a dead man's sack. Clara stood beside her oak trunk in a traveling dress gone stiff with dust. Boston had put polish on the dress once. The valley took it off in one breath. Before her lay the place Elias Thorne had written about. Not the warm house by the creek. Not the iron stove. Not the blue curtains he said he had bought from a peddler passing through. Not the porch where he had promised she could sit when the evening work was done. Only a square of black earth. Smoke still rose from it in thin threads. The boards had burned down to curled ribs. The chimney leaned like it had taken a bullet and had not yet decided whether to fall. A coffee pot lay split open near the stones, its tin belly warped white from heat. Clara took one step forward. The sole of her boot sank into wet soot. Behind her, a man laughed through his nose. "Best look hard, Miss Vance," Sheriff Miller said. "That there is your bridal chamber." He sat his horse with one hip turned loose, hat pulled low silver star bright against a coat, too clean for the place. Two riders behind him grinned into their collars. One spat black tobacco juice into the ash. Elias Thorne stood near the ruined gate. He had no hat in his hand, no word in his mouth. His coat sleeve was burned at the cuff, and dried blood marked the knuckles of his right hand. He kept that hand closed so tight the bones showed pale beneath the skin. Clara had known him from letters. Ink plain words, a careful hand. The man before her looked carved down by fire and bad weather. Miller leaned from the saddle and held out a paper ticket. "Returned fare," he said. "Bought it myself, seeing as Thorne's too proud and too broke. Train leaves east at sundown tomorrow. You take it, you might keep your toes." Clara looked at the ticket. The wind snapped its corner. Miller's mouth pulled sideways. "Don't let them pretty letters fool you. Elias Thorne carries ruin same as a dog carries fleas. His pa died owing. His barn fell. His stock froze. Now his house burns the night before his bride arrives." He lifted his voice, turning it toward the riders, toward the empty road, toward anyone who might be listening behind shut curtains in town. "Some men are born with a black mark over them." Elias's jaw moved once. Miller saw it and smiled wider. "Go on, Thorne. Tell her. Tell her how Sterling offered fair money for this cursed dirt and you were too mule-headed to sell. Tell her she'll sleep under sky because you wanted a kingdom made of mud." Elias took one step. The ash cracked under his boot. Clara heard leather creak at the sheriff's holster. She heard one horse blow hot steam through its bit. Elias stopped, but his shoulders stayed raised like a rope drawn to snapping. Miller pushed the ticket closer. "Take it, girl. Unless you favor freezing beside a man who couldn't keep a roof over his own name." Clara reached out. Elias lowered his eyes. For half a breath, the valley seemed to wait. Even the smoke bent flat. Clara's fingers closed on the ticket. Then she folded it once. Not hard. Not angry. Just neat. She tucked it into Miller's coat pocket while he was still leaning down. His grin went slack. Clara turned from him and walked into the ruin. Heat still lived under the ash. It came up through her boots. A blackened nail caught the hem of her dress and tore it with a dry rip. She did not stop. She crossed to what had been the front door and crouched beside a twisted iron hinge half buried in cinders. When she picked it up, it burned her palm. Her fingers tightened around it anyway. Elias moved as if to go to her, then halted. The sheriff said nothing. The riders no longer smiled. Clara stood. Soot marked one cheek where the wind had laid it. She looked past the broken chimney, past the burned walls down at the low stones set deep in the ground. Then she looked at Elias. "The stone footing is still good." The words struck harder than any shout. Elias stared at her hand, at the red mark rising across her skin, at the hinge she held like a tool instead of wreckage. Clara dropped it at his feet. First thing she said, "Where do we get timber?" Elias did not answer at once. His eyes stayed on Clara's burned palm where the shape of the hinge had bitten red into the skin. Then he picked up his hat from the ash, slapped it against his leg, and set it low on his head. "There's a mill in town," he said. Sheriff Miller gave a small chuckle from the saddle. Elias looked up. The sheriff's mouth shut. Clara shut the lid of her trunk, gripped the handle, and dragged it through the soot until Elias took the weight from her without a word. Together they walked the 2 miles toward Blackwood, with the ruined house smoking behind them, and Miller's riders trailing at a lazy pace like buzzards waiting to see where a thing would fall. The town was one street, one pump, one church bell, and a row of windows that went dark as they passed. At the far end stood sterling lumber stacked high with pine boards under a tin roof. The smell hit Clara first. Fresh cut sap, wet sawdust, wood enough for 10 houses, wood enough to save them before the cold came down hard. A man in a black fur collar stood by the office door, turning a silver-headed cane in one hand. Silas Sterling. His face was clean-shaved. His boots had no mud on them. Even his gloves looked fed better than most men in town. Elias stopped 6 paces from him. "I need lumber," Elias said. "Roof beams, wall studs, whatever you'll sell." Sterling's eyes moved over Elias, then Clara, then the ash on her dress. "Miss Vance," he said. "Boston sent less luggage than I expected." A few men near the saw shed laughed low. Clara did not look at them. Sterling tapped his cane once against the plank walk. "This yard does no business with Elias Thorne." Elias's hand opened and closed at his side. "I've got money. Bad money spends the same as good, but it leaves a smell." Elias took the coins from his pocket and held them out. His palm was cut across the middle. Dried blood sat in the cracks like dark wax. Sterling did not move. "Not a nail," he said. "Not a peg. Not one shaving off my floor." The mill yard went still. A saw blade somewhere in the shed spun down with a long metal whine. Sheriff Miller came up behind them, spurs scraping. "Told the girl," he said, "train leaves tomorrow." Elias turned. The motion was small, but Clara saw the change in him. His right thumb brushed the leather near his holster. His chest rose once, slow and deep. The men by the shed stepped back. Miller's hand dropped to his own gun. Clara moved before either man drew breath again. She put her burned palm over Elias's wrist. He looked down at her fingers. The red mark had split in one place. A bead of blood stood there and trembled. "Not here," she said. 2 words. Low. Plain. Elias's hand stayed where it was. Clara turned to Sterling. "You own the lumber," she said. Sterling smiled. "I own what a sensible man needs." Clara nodded once as though he had given her a measurement. Then she walked to the oak trunk Elias had set in the street. The men watched her kneel. Someone muttered that she was likely hunting for a handkerchief. Someone else said maybe she had packed crying clothes. Clara opened the trunk. No silk lay inside. No china. No lace. No soft little keepsakes from Boston parlors. Steel glinted under oilcloth. She lifted out a mason's hammer first, then a cold chisel, then a broad trowel worn smooth at the handle. She laid them on the plank walk one by one, each one landing with a hard, clean sound. Then came rolled drawings tied with twine, angled lines, stone joints, roof pitch, vent flues, weight marks, notes in a dead man's careful hand. "My father built mills, churches, cellars, and stone houses from Maine to Philadelphia," Clara said. "I mixed mortar before I could spell my own name." Sterling's cane stopped turning. Clara looked to the gray cliffs beyond town. "We do not need your lumber." Elias stared at the tools. Clara shut the trunk. "We need stone." By noon, Clara had turned the burned house from a grave into a plan. She drove 4 stakes into the black earth, where the old walls had stood, then ran twine between them. Elias watched her sight down the line with one eye shut, her burned palm wrapped in torn cloth. "The back wall goes into the bank," she said. 3 feet deep, stone on the face, earth over the roof. The cliff will keep the north wind off us." Elias looked at the gray rock beyond the creek. Shale lay there in flat seams. "That stone will split," he said. "So will a skull if struck right. Bring me slabs the length of your arm." He did not smile. He took the rope, the hammer, and the wedges. The first climb cut him before he reached the ledge. Loose shale slid under his boots and rattled down the slope. He drove a wedge into a seam, struck it, struck again, and the sound cracked across the valley like rifle fire. By the 10th slab, blood had worked through his glove. By the 20th, his shoulders shook when he bent. Clara did not call him down. She dug. She set her boots in the cold mud and carved the bank square with a short-handled spade. Ash stuck to her skirt. The wind pushed grit against her teeth. Each time she set a stone, she tapped it, listened, shifted it, tapped again, until it sat tight as a shut mouth. At dusk, Elias came down with a slab across his back, bent nearly double. Clara took one end. His fingers would not let go. "Elias." He blinked and the stone slid into her hands. She saw his palms then. Skin peeled loose. Blood lined the creases. Grit had stuck in it. She opened her trunk and took out the white dress folded at the bottom. Elias stared. "No." Clara tore the skirt down the seam. The sound went through him harder than the saw blade in town. "That was for church," he said. "That was for a house with a roof." She ripped it again and wrapped the strips around his hammer handle, then around his hands. The cloth drank red quick. For 2 days they worked that way. Elias cut stone from the cliff and hauled it down on a drag made from burned door planks. Clara mixed mortar in a washtub with lime, sand, clay, and creek water cold enough to numb the wrists. She worked the trowel until blisters rose, broke, and filled with gray paste. At night, she held her hands over a coal pan and opened her fingers one at a time. They spoke little. "More lime. Lower on this side. Hold it. I have it." Once when a stone slipped, Elias caught it against his thigh and made no sound. His breath came through his nose in white bursts. Clara set her shoulder under the slab beside his, and together they lifted until it locked. Men rode by on the 3rd afternoon. Miller's deputy. 2 of Sterling's hands. Their horses picked through the mud ice hanging under their bellies. One rider laughed. "Look there." Thorne found a woman to help dig his hole. Another called, "Bury yourselves deep. Saves the preacher work." Elias kept his back to them. The muscles in his jaw jumped. Clara pressed mortar into a joint with her thumb and scraped the excess clean. "Wall's out of plumb by a 1/4 inch," she said. Elias looked at her. She held out the line. He took it, and the riders got no more from them. By the 4th evening, the dugout had 3 stone walls, a packed earth floor, a narrow flue, and roof beams made from the few charred timbers worth saving. Clara laid shale over them in overlapping rows pitched steep so snow would slide. The last light went blue. Then the wind stopped. Elias, standing on the roof frame, looked west. A hard white line had risen over the valley. Clara climbed up beside him, mortar freezing on her cuffs. One flake struck the back of her hand. Then another. Below them, half the roof still lay open to the sky. The snow came sideways before Clara got down from the roof. It struck her face like thrown sand. One breath later, the valley vanished. The creek, the burned gate, the road to town, all gone behind a white wall that moved and screamed. Elias caught her by the waist and lowered her through the open roof gap. Inside, he said, "You too." He did not answer. He crawled across the roof frame on hands and knee, dragging the last shale slabs toward the open run. Wind shoved at him like a shoulder. The boards under him groaned. Clara stood below with mortar in a pan gone stiff at the edges. Snow poured in through the gap, and hissed where it struck the coal pan. "Hand me the trowel," Elias called. She threw it up. He caught it, laid a bed of mortar, and slapped a stone into place. Another. Another. His fingers moved slower each time. White gathered on his hat brim, then on his lashes. The roof still had a man-wide strip open when the first real gust hit. The whole dugout shuddered. Wet mortar cracked in a thin black line above the east wall. Clara heard it. So did Elias. He froze palm flat on the shale. Then came the sound from the cliff. Not thunder. Wood, a deep split, long and ugly like the earth tearing a tooth from its jaw. Elias turned his head. Clara climbed onto a crate and looked through the roof gap. At the cliff edge, an old pine bent under ice. Its trunk was thick as a wagon. The top whipped once. Twice. Then it broke. The tree came down slow, at first tearing through smaller limbs, then fast, straight toward the dugout roof. Clara's hand closed on the crate until a splinter slid under her nail. Elias. He was already moving. He dropped from the roof and landed hard in the snow outside. Clara scrambled to the doorway, but the wind threw it back in her face. By the time she forced it open, Elias had his rope loose from the peg by the wall. The pine slid down the slope, its crown dragging ice and broken rock. Elias ran into the storm. Not far. 10 yards, maybe 12. Far enough to be swallowed from the waist down by snow that had blown into the hollow. He spun the loop once. The wind slapped it flat. He gathered it back, set his boots wide, and spun again. Clara stood in the doorway with the storm cutting across her eyes. She could not feel her burned hand. She could feel the splinter under her nail each time her fingers tightened on the jam. Elias threw. The loop vanished into white. For one beat, nothing. Then the rope snapped tight. The pine jerked. Its crown swung a hand's width. Not enough. Elias wrapped the rope around a stone brace Clara had built beside the doorway. He put his shoulder into it, then his back, then both hands pulling with all of him. The rope cut through his wraps and opened the wounds beneath. Red marked the white hemp. "Let it go," Clara shouted. He did not turn. The tree bore down. The brace grated against the ground. Clara dropped to her knees and shoved a loose wedge stone under its base. The brace caught. Elias hauled again, teeth-bared face streaked with snowmelt and blood from where ice had cut his cheek. The pine swung. Its broken trunk slammed against the outer bank with a sound that punched the air from Clara's chest. Branches scraped over the new roof, tearing one shale slab loose. The trunk missed the center beam by less than a foot and crashed past the dugout into the creek bed. For a moment, there was only wind. Then the rope went slack. Elias stood with both hands still closed on it. His knees bent. Clara ran. The snow took him before she reached him. The storm quit before dawn. It did not fade. It stopped sharp as a door latch catching. 1 minute the roof groaned under the white fury. The next Blackwood Valley lay under a hard silence so deep the drip of thawed snow from a roof stone sounded like a hammer tap. Inside the dugout, a fire burned clean. Not a cough of smoke came back into the room. The flame drew straight up, gold and blue at the base, feeding through the narrow flue Clara had cut through stone and clay. A slit low in the wall pulled cold air under the hearth, and the draft took it clean like a lung made by hand. Elias opened his eyes to that fire. At first he did not know where his body ended. Heat lay heavy over him. Wool scratched his chin. His boots were gone. His hands were wrapped thick in strips of Clara's torn white dress, now stained brown and gray. Every finger beat like a nail had been driven through it. He tried to sit up. A needle clicked against tin. "Stay down." Clara sat beside the hearth, with her sleeves rolled to the elbow. Her hair had come loose and dried in hard ropes near her face. A black bruise marked one cheekbone. Across her lap lay a spool of thread, a curved needle and a little pan dark with melted snow. The front of her dress was stiff with mortar. She lifted the coffee pot from the coals with a rag poured a cup, and set it near him where the steam touched his face. How long, he asked. Night and half a morning, he swallowed. His throat scraped. The roof. Clara turned her head toward the low stone ceiling. Elias followed her gaze. The roof held. Shale sat tight in its rows. Earth packed above it had frozen hard, making the whole place one piece with the bank. The broken pine lay outside somewhere, but no branch had come through. No wind crept along the floor. No snow sifted down on the blankets. Clara had finished the gap after dragging him in. He saw it in the mortar marks. Fresh joints near the door. Finger trails in the clay. A place where a stone had been set crooked, then righted in haste. Beside the hearth, her tools lay clean in a row, not because she had rested, but because she had used them all, and put each back before her arms gave out. Something stirred beyond the side wall. Elias turned his head. Clara stood, took a lantern, and opened a low plank door he had thought was storage. Warm animal breath rolled out. 2 hens blinked from a crate. A half-starved barn cat sat beside them, tail over its paws. His old mule Buck stood in the shallow back-cut ears, drooping alive under a blanket made from feed sacks. "You built a stock hole," Elias said. "I built a house," Clara answered. "A house keeps what is under its roof." He looked at her hands then. Not her face, her hands. The palm he had watched burn on the hinge was split and raw. The knuckles were swollen. Lime had eaten white patches into the skin. There were cuts across the fingers where Shale had slipped, and black thread marks where she had stitched herself before stitching him. He reached out. His hand shook before it found hers. Clara did not pull away. His thumb passed over the callus at the base of her finger. Once. Slow. Like he was reading a name carved in stone. "I wrote you a fine house," he said. She looked at the fire, then at the walls. "You gave me footing." The fire snapped once. Outside, a crow called over the snowfield. Far off, under that clean white stillness, came a small metal sound. A bell, then another. Elias turned toward the door. Sleigh runners scraped over frozen ground. The sleigh came slow over the frozen flats. Its runners cut the crust with a dry, mean scrape. 2 horses pulled it, their hides dark with sweat, under blankets trimmed in fox. Sheriff Miller rode behind, collar up, nose red, his hat crusted white at the brim. Silas Sterling sat in the sleigh like a judge going to court. Behind him lay a pine box, cheap boards, rope handles, no lid nailed down yet. Clara saw it through the narrow door crack before Elias did. Her hand closed on the latch. Elias swung his legs from the cot. His knees held. He stood barefoot on the packed earth floor, took one breath, then reached for his boots. "You don't have to rise," Clara said. He pulled on the first boot and winced when his wrapped fingers bent. "They brought a box to my house." Outside, Miller reined in near the old burned gate. His eyes went from the black square of ash to the low stone front under the bank. His mouth opened a little. The dugout did not sit like a grave. It rose out of the hillside, dark stone, tight-jointed roof sloped sharp and clean. Not a drift clung to it. Snow had slid down both sides in smooth piles. From the short chimney, smoke climbed straight into the blue morning, thick and warm. Sterling stood in the sleigh. His silver cane slipped from his glove and struck the floorboards. No one picked it up. "Well," Miller said, but the word died before it grew teeth. Then one of the horses jerked its head toward the cliff wall. A low sound came from there. Cattle. Not Elias's. He had none left worth counting. A dozen of Sterling's red cattle stood pressed along the south stone wall ribs, showing hides crusted with ice. Their breath steamed against Clara's masonry. Some had lowered their heads near the vent stones where warm air seeped out in a thin, steady pull. A calf lay on folded legs in the lee of the dugout, alive, one ear flicking at a fly that was not there. Sterling stared. His ranch mark showed plain on every flank. Miller looked from the cattle to Sterling. You left them out. Sterling's jaw worked. No sound came. One cow shifted and rubbed her shoulder against the warm wall. The stone gave back heat like a banked stove. Clara stepped into the doorway. The sunlight hit the torn dress strips on Elias's hands, the soot along her hem, the white lime scars across her fingers. She did not smooth her hair. She did not wipe her cheek. Elias came up beside her and set one wrapped hand against the doorframe Clara had built from the last good oak plank. Sterling's eyes fixed on the smoke, then on the cattle, then on the coffin. The box looked smaller now. Miller cleared his throat. "Thorn," he said. "Seems we came under a wrong notion." Elias looked at the pine box, then at Miller's clean star, then at Sterling standing in fur while his own stock warmed themselves on another man's wall. He said nothing. Clara looked past them to the gray valley, to the road that had once offered her a way back east, to the black ash now half covered by snow. Her hand slid into Elias's good elbow. Sterling found his voice at last. "These are my cattle." Clara's eyes moved to the animals. They know. The calf lifted its head and blew steam through its nose. Miller shifted in the saddle. Leather creaked. One of the deputies looked down at the coffin and turned his face away. Elias stepped back inside. Clara went with him. Before closing the door, Elias looked once more at the men in the snow. "Mind the drift," he said. Then he shut the oak door. The latch dropped heavy into place and the